My name is Paula Renker. I am a PhD in nursing, so I'm a nurse scientist. I'm a registered nurse. And right now, I'm not certified in anything else because I've been focusing on research, which goes with the PhD. You know, there are some people who enter this life and they know just what they're going to do. They have a plan and they dedicate their life to achieving that plan. That was never what I was. In fact, I think I've been rather clueless in my life. My mother and a guidance counselor decided that I would go get a baccalaureate degree in nursing when very few nurses got baccalaureate degrees. I've been a nurse for more than 40 years. And so I went to college. And what I can remember about that time was I had to learn to talk differently because I was from Appalachia. My mother was from West Virginia. I grew up with a lot of folk myths, and I had to figure those out. But if I could think of one theme that had my college program, which was 4 years year-round, so it was very intense, was that it wasn't enough just to know how to do nursing skills or to be proficient and psychomotor adapted, which I'm not. It was the most important thing was to know why you were doing what you were doing. That was really I just became part of my very system. Why am I doing what I'm doing? So when I graduated from my undergraduate degree, I stood outside, and I can find a spot right by the College of Nursing building today. And I stood there and looked in the sky and I said, God, strike me dead if I ever go into another school of nursing. And God laughed. So I was another clueless person. We went in the Army, my husband and I. We were married right after college, and we were sent to Germany, and I worked at the Army hospital there. I went in with another nurse. We were interviewing together, and she wanted to be an OB nurse, and I wanted to do anything but OB. I really love peds, but I only got to work in peds for 2 months before we went in the Army. But I said, anything but OB. I'll be so happy. Colonel Mobley said, oh, Paula, you're going to OB. So I went into this world that I never wanted to be in. And I was exposed to the most incredible people, midwives from Great Britain and nurses from all over the country. And it was the most phenomenal experience that I've had. So when I came back to the United States, and I started to work in Ohio, I found out it was like going back to the dark ages. Fathers weren't allowed in the delivery room. Women were drugged out of their minds. I mean, it was incredible. I was so upset, but labor and delivery was my area, so I worked there, and I worked hard to be the best nurse I could, but I didn't understand why they were doing what they were doing, and that made me feel like I wasn't given the best care that I could. So my first plan was, because I, in Germany, had gone through natural childbirth, because it was the more European way to do things, and I didn't know any different, was to become involved with that type of birthing and teach Lamaze. And so I went through a very extensive training program, and the first time in my life, I got involved with healthcare policy, health and how the power strategies in the medical care can formulate and affect a woman's life. And I became more empowered to think as a woman and an educated woman. And that was another step that I took that I really wasn't expecting. When I became more involved with childbirth education, parents would come back and talk about their birth stories. And then I learned that labor and delivery nurses were making many mistakes. And I said, how can I make them better? And so it turned out that I went to nursing education. I loved teaching OB. It was all the things I wanted to be. And I started teaching in a diploma school, and then I found out I'm going to need to get my master's. So even as God laughed, I went back and got my master's. And then I taught in the College of Nursing. And I used my best practices, this drive to find out, to learn, to explore, to plan the best education, to learn the most so my students could give the best practices that they could. And eventually then it became clear, if I wanted to stay teaching OB, I had to get a PhD. And back then it was only in nursing that would account. So I said I was always interested in teen pregnancy. My sister was a 17-year-old who had complications with a teen pregnancy. And as I was in labor and delivery, I saw that some people did well and other people didn't do well. And what was the difference? They had the same physiological structure. Their health status seemed to be the best, but some would flourish and some would not in teens. And so that's what I decided I wanted to study. And I started studying as I was taking these graduate classes to prepare for my PhD. I then applied to a full PhD program. And right before I was going to start there, I had an eye tumor, was diagnosed, and I couldn't start. And so I had to sit out a year. And during that time period, I had an opportunity to write, I thought it was a scholarship. What it turned out to be was a National Institute of Health with a Nursing Institute of Nursing Research pre-doctoral fellowship. But again, I was rather clueless. Someone said, you should do this. I said, I'll do this. And so they said, you need someone to work with you. Okay. So I got someone to work with me. And she said, Paula, I'll work with you. I'll be glad to do this. And I found out she was well-known, phenomenal mentor and researcher. But she said, you'll have to do violence and abuse. And I thought, I can't do that. I can't do that. I had experiences of that with my family, and I couldn't do that. And she says, well, that's fine. That's fine. Think about it. I went to church. The scripture that week was from Habakkuk. And it talked about violence and not understanding violence and not wanting to know anything about it, but railing against it. And God said, write down the vision clearly upon the tablet. And I thought, oh, I guess I'm supposed to do this. So I wrote for my fellowship. I was awarded a 5 years pre-doctoral fellowship. My doctoral study was fully funded because of this. And then I became involved more through my education, I got to make presentations around the country. I've been into multiple areas that I've never been to talk to other nurses, and it was wonderful. I loved it because I kept learning why I was doing what I was doing. And then I had the opportunity to learn from the most important people, the women themselves, as they taught me, so I could understand them and use my education skills to plan care. And actually, some of my projects have been used at the national level to help determine care. For example, we didn't have enough research that actually justified physicians asking women about violence. Do you have violence in your life? And they would say, are you safe at home? Oh, my locks work well, they would say. They needed to ask directly, and they thought women would be upset. So I did a research study with about 500 postpartum women. I developed a computer program. And they talked to the computer, and I think they felt a little bit more confident doing that way. And I asked them, were you asked? No. I said, well, did you know that in Ohio, they don't report violence when you ask. Would you have changed your answer? And many said yes. And then I asked, were you offended? For those that were asked, were you offended? And they said, no, I wasn't. And that research project, when it was published, was used to help as one of 50, there were 50 of us who did this, and the National Preventative Services Task Force, who determines what is going to be actually accomplished in medical care in the United States, used my study with the others, and they changed the practice. They changed their guidance, and they said healthcare providers should ask women about violence. If we don't ask, we can never start. It's not the most easiest thing in the world to answer, but I had that little piece. I got to lobby Congress. I was there when Joe Biden, then senator, actually sponsored the Violence Against Women Act, and we started to have some rights for women who were abused. And all of this started because somebody said I should be someplace. I think that there are many nurses like me who want to know why they're doing what they're doing. And I think it's where the doctor of nursing practice really comes into fruition, because the doctor of nursing practice focuses on clinical nurses who, like me, really want to be in the clinical area and make the best practices for their patients. And it allows them to develop the skills, especially in my course. I get to talk a little bit about my course, which is the translation of evidence into practice. So it teaches them to look at research and to see what is the best, to appraise its strength, and to see, will it fit into my area? Because these clinical nurses that come to the DNP program have a rich knowledge of their patients and their patient population and where they're supposed to be and what's supposed to accomplish and what's going to be possible. So we take those innate skills that they bring with us, and we add the scholarly aspect of it so that they can look at research and then plan using all of their knowledge and their intuition and their experience and their patients' values to make the best possible care for their patients. That's an exciting opportunity as an educator. So I think in summary, I think people can be worried about, did I hear the message? Did I get this notification? It was sort of like, oh, It's sort of like with a new mom. You know, sometimes they look at these Pampers commercials and they think they're just supposed to love their babies the second they come out. And indeed, when they look at them, they go, holy cow, that came from me? That's a baby. And then they gradually fall in love and they became enmeshed and they become one. And that's how it has been with nursing with me. The different threads that have been present in my life when people decide where I'd go to school or what I should study or what I should take advantage of have really been woven into the tapestry of my life. I've been a nurse for over 40 years, and like many people my age, when I lie in bed in the middle of the night and I think about death, one of the questions that keeps coming to me, did my life make a difference? Did my life make a difference? And I can whisper back, because of nursing, it did.